welcome back to the channel. This is your host, Young Brando, and we are going to be talking about watches. I'm picking up on the thread from yesterday, and I have something like a time constraint today, so I will immediately go into talking about the top 25 from Robb Report's 50 greatest watches of all time. And then after we are done with that, in about an hour and a half, a little less than that by now, this is going to join me, and we are going to talk about the new Leonardo DiCaprio movie. So stay tuned for that. I'm even more excited about that because that was something that talking about movies with my friends, and especially with my friend Dizordis, has been something on the back of my mind ever since we did that Scarface episode. I'm very much looking forward to it. So let's go right away with the Robb Report 50 greatest watches of all time. We have talked about the bottom half of the top 50 yesterday, and this is basically something they involved experts, collectors, dealers, auctioneers, and other industry individuals to really come up with something that that really is less, I guess, market driven, less like an advertorial, as you know, that's how some of the writing on watches might become on these kinds of outlets. So far, it was pretty interesting. If I had someone else with me on board for this stuff for the first half, I think it could have been a different dynamic, maybe a little more playful. We could think about whether these watches belong to such a list at all, or whether they should be placed higher, lower. That would have been interesting. So if you have any opinions about that, please feel free to chime in the chat, and I will obviously will make sure to read them if you send them in the form of a super chat. But please hit the like button, and let's go off. Number 25, we have the Hoya Carrera. This is, of course, the classic chronograph, a contemporary of the Rolex Daytona, just as iconic, if not necessarily as popular. It is named after the dangerous Carrera Panamericana race in Mexico, much like the Porsche engine that is named after it. It features a 36 millimeter case, a smooth bezel, rejo that features a scale for seconds for 1/5 of a second, sword hands, and of course a classic Valjoux ébauche for the chronograph movement, which has, depending on the variation, a triple register or dual register look. Of course, there are also a lot of different variants in terms of the dials, silver dials, black dials, and your usual reverse and panda dials as well, reverse panda and panda dials. Of course, it has it has another tie-in, of course, maybe an even more practical one, more immediate one, more organic one, with Hoya's involvement in motorsports, and especially in the golden era of Formula One. So a true classic chronograph, an icon in its own right. That is the Hoya Carrera at Number 25, this is an example of reference 2448 in gold. Number 24, we have something much more humble, much less complicated, but just as iconic, the Rolex Datejust. Incidentally, it's one of those pieces that are released right around World War II, kind of benefiting from the post-war boom for its ascending popularity. It was released for the first time in 1945. That's why Rolex just dropped the Datejust book after the Submariner, kind of jumping the line because it was first rumored that Nick Fox was working on a GMT Master book, but obviously Rolex has its own way of celebrating anniversaries, and I guess it felt right for them to allow the Datejust to jump the line, to skip the line, and actually get its own tribute in year 2025, its 80th anniversary. Of course, the Oyster case remains the core of many Rolex watches, and perhaps really the primary reason that they have had such a leg up on basically every single one of their competitors. And of course, it actually takes its name from the instantaneous date jump that it has promised, instead of a date wheel that changes maybe over the course of like 4 hours, from 10 to 2. This basically changed over right around midnight, just at midnight, so to speak. Obviously, Rolex likes playing around with these kinds of names, sometimes picking on the French, at others referring to English. So it can be just or juste, which means correct. So either dat juste or they just, whatever it is, in either case, it actually promised something that was a complication in its own right, at least in 1945. Of course, the Jubilee bracelet is almost synonymous with this watch, although, of course, Datejusts are not exclusively mounted on Jubilee bracelets. However, the Jubilee bracelet itself, if I'm not mistaken, came out on the 40th anniversary too. So it's not on the 40th anniversary of Rolex. So it's not a coincidence that a lot of the initial Datejusts were mounted on what was then a very special 5-link bracelet that was made for Rolex by Gefrère. Hi, Ryan Offrey. Walking dogs with a Tissot Cosc super shitter on my wrist. I try to move away from that language because I don't want to really drag any watches, but I also get incensed sometimes. So maybe there are certain categories of watches that we can still call in that archy luxury jargon. Lot 23 is not such a watch. It's the Blancpain 50 Fathoms, one of the most poetically named watches of all time, and by some accounts, which to a large extent, our friend of the channel, Jose Perez, Periscope, has dismantled. It is also the first modern dive watch. Whatever your account may be, whether you prefer the Submariner or the 50 Fathoms, it certainly has, in terms of establishing the aesthetics of how a dive watch should look, Blancpain's piece has just as much of a claim to being influential. An oversized piece with a rotating bezel for dive timing, and in this case with a bakelite insert that is itself luminous, which of course doubles up, or doubles down rather, on the highly luminous nature of the dial itself, which of course privileges legibility and utility over everything else underwater. It had, for the time, quite a robust depth rating, 91 meters, 50 fathoms, surprise, surprise. And it was, of course, produced much like its contemporary, the Rolex Submariner, both for civilians and, of course, also with military specifications in mind. Speaking of historical forebears, number 22 is the Cartier Santos, the first men's wristwatch by most accounts. It was designed by Louis Cartier for his friend, Alberto Santos Dumont, who was a gentleman pilot, a Brazilian, who asked from his friend a timepiece that he could actually wear on his wrist in the cockpit. And the Santos design was a result of that commission, a result of that idea. And in fact, its classic bezel design that today is also echoed on its bracelet with those exposed screws is actually something that they took after the design of one of Santos Dumont's own planes, the Demoiselle, which had, of course, these panels that were that had exposed screws on the plane, right? You know, if you could visualize and bear with me, indulge me, visualize an antique aircraft, and you will, I think, get what I mean by and large. It was, of course, made for Alberto Santos Dumont himself in the early years of the 20th century, and was produced for the public beginning in 1911 with a mechanical movement from European Watch and Clock Company, which is a joint venture, as you might know, if you are a frequent audience member of this channel. It's a joint venture of Cartier and Jaeger-LeCoultre. Pardon me. Number 21, we have already looked at a few variations of the perpetual calendar in conjunction with other complications from Patek Philippe, perhaps because of the simplicity and purity of its design. The 3940 perpetual calendar, pure and simple, places higher than the 3970, which was its contemporary, the perpetual calendar chronograph, which we had found at number 32. This is number 21 for the 3940, which you see here in in 3 variations here in this picture. With the yellow gold at the center, with the so-called doré dial, golden dial that matches more or less the tones of the case. Classic 36 millimeter sizing. It debuted in 1985, so what we have in our hands is another neo-vintage classic. Produced in 4 series, pretty much like its contemporary 3970, with as many as 8,000 examples produced over the course of that time. And again, this throwback quality, this nostalgic appeal of the 3940 as much as the 3970, which still harkens back to the time of Philipp Stern's leadership, the current president emeritus of the company, who led them from 1993 to 2009. It is one of those pieces that has stayed the test of time. At number 20, the Cartier Tank Centré. It is a very elegant timepiece, an elongated version of the classic Cartier icon, the tank. Much like its name implies, it has a very sensual curvature to its case design, which obviously also has an ergonomic purpose. You might think even by that quality, it was very much ahead of its time. Of course, the modern popularity of the Tank Centré has a lot to do with the special commissions that were placed through the now defunct Cartier NSO program, the new special order program. And the minute these special commissions were seen in public or made an appearance on Instagram, they were almost instantly copied, or let's say inspired other collectors who placed similar orders, if not perhaps they just literally ordered the same watch, which was actually possible, which was included in the fine print, even though it seems a little bit absurd. But anyway, I guess that's one of the reasons as to why that program is currently discontinued. But some beautiful examples there. Many variants, of course, because it is by definition a piece that was either made in limited quantities on the occasion of special anniversaries and limited editions, or made by commission, made by special order. Lot 19, another classic that was revived and given perhaps a new currency in the 21st century, but this is possibly the most iconic iteration of the Patek Philippe World Timer. Of course, the original reference is quite charming in its own right, but of course, it is a small watch. The 1415 HU, Heure Universelle, is a small watch by modern standards, so its popularity for that reason is always somewhat tempered. The 2523, on the other hand, both with the design of its angular curves and its relatively oversized case dimensions, remains quite popular. 36 millimeters in diameter, and of course with those stylized lugs, it has a bigger wrist presence, not to mention, of course, the double crown design, one of which is used for time setting, of course, at 3 o'clock, pardon me, and at 9 o'clock, you have another crown to control the city's ring, which of course gives you simultaneously the time in 24 different zones. And of course, there's a 24-hour ring as well that encircles the dial center, which can be found with guilloche work and much more rarely with a cloisonné enamel dial. And of course, I don't even have to tell you which ones are more desirable, more collectible. And in those configurations, in those ultra aspirational configurations, of course, we are talking about a multi-million-dollar piece. Lot 18 is a more modern version of the Patek Philippe perpetual calendar chronograph, the 5970. Again, its size, its relatively contemporary proportions are at least part of its appeal. One of the reasons for its popularity. 40 millimeters in diameter over against the 36 millimeter diameter 3970. It's also one of the last of its kind in the sense that this is the last generation. This is the ultimate reference for Patek Philippe perpetual calendar chronographs that were built on the legacy base of the Lemania CH27 caliber. According to Nick Fox, and he writes this in Patek Philippe, the authorized biography, current Patek Philippe president Thierry Stern described the reference 5970 as a final test by his father, Philippe Stern, before passing on the stewardship of the company to him, to his son. This reference was released in 2004 5 years before Thierry Stern would officially take over the company. Today, it is regarded as one of the most collectible modern watches by Patek Philippe. Even though it is a modern watch and it is a serially produced piece, still it exists in about 2,800 examples, which is still quite limited, even though it is one of the more numerous references, runs as far as highly collectible Patek pieces go. Lot 17 is already a modern classic, perhaps the most recognizable watch by François-Paul Jean. We're looking at the Jean chronomètre à résonance. Pardon me. Of course, Breguet, more than any ancient master, as Robb Report writes here, served as the inspiration for Jean's overarching legacy piece, the chronomètre à résonance. Of course, Breguet was the person who implemented this principle of resonance, essentially two independent gear trains placed in close proximity to each other so that they may make up for each other's errors, so that they may resonate together, regulate each other in a way. And Breguet made clocks following this principle, but also very famously pocket watches. And obviously those were around 63 millimeters in diameter. So it was quite a feat for F.B. Jean to actually make a wristwatch that followed the principle of resonance. Of course, nowadays, these pieces are much bigger, but originally, the first wristwatches that were released by Jean were 38 millimeters in diameter. So it makes everything much more impressive. Of course, these pieces are famously used as a kind of dual time watch as well, because obviously the two independent dials that synchronize ultimately in terms of their seconds lend themselves really well to displaying time in your locale, or and an additional reference time or home time. And again, its recognizability perhaps plays just as important of a role, considering how desirable, how aspirational these watches have become, and how iconic François-Paul Jean himself has become as the independent watchmaker in our time. Please hit the like button. I would really appreciate it. If you have any questions, feel free to send them in. I've shared the link to this list. We're at lot number 16, and we're looking at, again, another modern classic, first released in 1994 with the revival of A. Lange und Söhne, the Lange 1, Lange 1, the watch that relaunched Germany's most high-end niche watchmaker, A. Lange und Söhne of Glashütte in Saxony. Of course, this was a pet project for the leader of IWC and Jaeger-LeCoultre at the time, Günther Blümlein, who teamed up with the descendant of the family, Walter Lange, and realized the revival of this distinguished brand in the wake of German reunification. 4 watches were released in 1994, and perhaps the Lange one remains the most emblematic, most recognizable, if not necessarily the most complicated. The asymmetric dial layout, again, is today, plays today no small part in that appeal. However, that was quite unusual for its time. Realize that even when, I think this is a great example, I should say, about what I'm trying to demonstrate. Even when the Nautilus craze was beginning in earnest, the 5712 was still considered quite undesirable by most and overlooked, right? It only started hitting with the larger community of watch buyers when the stocks were completely depleted and when people had to start paying significant premiums on the secondary market for the jumbo. So as recently as 2016, 2017, people would actually frown upon a watch with an asymmetric dial layout. So imagine the kind of risk that A. Lange & Söhne was taking by placing a watch like this at the center of their lineup, by claiming perhaps in advance this particular design as quote unquote their icon. Of course, more than 30 years later now, it is a modern classic which placed A. Lange & Söhne on the map as a high horology manufacturer. And of course, the risk seems have ultimately paid off. Because again, if you are trying to make yourself a name in what is a crowded market, being actually original, being distinctive and visually recognizable, instantly recognizable, is a huge asset. Lot 15. This time we have another Rolex icon, the Day-Date, perhaps one of the most aspirational watches of all time, but certainly of yesteryear. Born in 1956, with a complication that was, again, very distinctive at the time, not only because it combines day and date, but also, as it is still proud to say, because it spells out the days always in full. And of course, one of the distinctive signatures of the watch is, in a way, its infinite customizability, already imbuing the watch with something personal, something culturally and linguistically specific, right? Because those day wheels are available in so many different languages of the world, always spelling the day in full, spelling out the day in full. And of course, you can even think of the same thing about the date wheel, right? You know, it has different expressions, different ways of writing those numbers as well for the dates. And I'm not even getting into the more crazier, more outlandish, and original examples like the puzzle day date, which has, in addition to its beautiful cloisonné enamel dial, of course, has emojis and like mood descriptions instead of days and dates. Of course, the day date in so many ways is associated, canonized as it were, with its distinctive bracelet design, the president bracelet, which in fact, by order of synecdoche, ends up giving the name to the watch itself. A lot of times people would speak of the Rolex president or presidential Rolex Prezi when they talk about a Rolex day date. Such is the iconic association of the watch and the bracelet. This may be one of my favorite combinations, by the way. I call it the World Cup because of the particular combination of the materials, of course. 18 karat gold. I think in the case of the World Cup, it might be pure gold. I mean, as pure as one can actually render it into a mini sculpture. But you know what I mean. It's higher than 18 carats. And in this case, of course, there's a malachite dial, which is used at the base of that trophy's design. One of my favorite combinations of all time when it comes to this particular watch, this particular model, the day dates. Number 14 is the Cartier Crash. Again, a creation of the social media age, of the modern hype, first and foremost, even though, of course, the surrealist lines of its original design date all the way back to the swinging 60s in London. It was designed in 1967 by Rupert Emerson in collaboration with Jean-Jacques Cartier, who was heading the London branch of the house at the time. And at the time, basically, Cartier operated as this triumvirate, so to speak, between Paris, New York, and London, which in so many ways had their distinct and autonomous ways of operation. In 2002, perhaps that hype received or reached a fever pitch, where an example of the Cartier Crash sold on the disruptive auction site Loop This for a record $1.5 million. And of course, once again, the creations through Cartier's program, the new special order program, had a lot to do with popularizing this particular design in our time, because once again, otherwise, Cartier released it in very limited quantities, either as limited editions, special editions, or as exclusive allocations through the Cartier London boutique. course, historically appropriate. Lot number 13 is the Erlang und Söhne datograph. Of course, they left the actual original datograph a little bit in the background there, unfortunately, on the right. That is the flyback chronograph that may have changed the trajectory of elite Swiss makers inexorably at the turn of the new millennium. Pardon me, released in 1999. One of the earliest in-house chronograph movements developed in the post-quartz era, post-quartz crisis era, perhaps I should say. The L951-1 became basically the golden standard in terms of its architecture, the quality and variety of its finishing. And of course, it also became basically the base of an entire line by Erlang und Söhne with so many different variations, like a perpetual calendar tourbillon, so many other examples. The one that you're looking at is, for example, the perpetual calendar tourbillon with in that ultra limited Lumen edition with transparent dial under which the luminous wheels peak. And of course, one of the honors that the datograph in that first generation carries is the fact that the pink gold example has been famously associated with the master independent watchmaker Philippe Dufour, who wore it proudly and called it the best chronograph ever made. Number 12 is another perpetual calendar chronograph by Patrick Philippe, perhaps one of the most desirable, 2499. Again, maybe it is not as rare as the original reference, 1518, but because of its dimensions, perhaps it is even more popular. 37 millimeters in diameter. Consider that the 3970 that comes much later is actually a smaller case. But in terms of the design and proportions of this case, again, many collectors regard it as being even the more beautiful of the two between 2499 and the 1518. The beautifully downturned lugs, the concave bezel, still produced in less than 350 examples over a 35-year production span. At number 12, the Patek Philippe Perpetual Calendar Chronograph, reference 2499. Lot 11, number 11 again. Sorry, I'm still in my auction mindset, I guess. We are looking at one of the most popular watches of our contemporary era, perhaps a watch that in one of its variations jump-started the modern hype for Rolex as well. But of course, its origins go to the early 1950s, and it is tied with the romanticism of commercial travel, the jet set era. As the story goes, Pan Am Airlines needed a way for its pilots to track two time zones at once, or rather local time as well as the Greenwich Mean Time. And Rolex responded to those demands, to that commission, by developing the original GMT Master reference 6542 with an additional hour hand that showed on a bidirectional bezel with 24-hour markings reference time. And as one of the distinct marks of Rolex's design language, after it gains its crown guards with reference 1675, the GMT Master remains visually recognizable between its origins, its vintage, neo-vintage iterations on the one part, and its contemporary versions on the other. My friend Charlie Dunn says about the GMT Master, "To me, many of the greatest watches ever produced were references introduced in the 1960s. Watches such as the Rolex GMT Master reference 1675 or the Submariner reference 5512 are watches I'm very fortunate to enjoy in my personal collection." Beautiful. Number 10, the original serially produced perpetual calendar chronograph by Patek, the reference 1518 that we have been talking about. The fact that I have referred to this watch so many times before it even appeared on the list should tell you something, should give you an idea about how iconic it is. The very first regular production wristwatch to have this complication, to have this combination of complications between the perpetual calendar and the chronograph. Released in 1941, right in the middle of the World War II, and produced until about 1954, understood to be made in about 281 examples or so. It was quite a marvel for its time, containing such complexity in a case that scaled right around 35 millimeters in diameter. Most examples are in yellow gold. The pink gold is more rare and in many ways, therefore, more desirable for collectors. And it is understood to exist in only 4 examples that are rendered in stainless steel, which makes them a very hot commodity in the auction market, which we will test one more time this fall in Geneva. Number 9 is, again, one of my personal favorites. This time, the Jaeger-LeCoultre Reverso, the classic Art Deco design, perhaps the definitive rectangular watch, made all the more quirky and perhaps more desirable with its swiveling case, which allows the wearer to flip the face of the watch. And that was a function initially designed for officers of the British Empire who were in India at the time and who were quite fond of the game of polo. And this was the solution that businessman César de Tré came up with to avoid such accidents during the game. And of course, it took the function of the case, which was again very utilitarian at the beginning, that ability to flip the face onto a metal case back itself became part of the culture of the game. People started decorating those case backs with special engravings, with the badges that belong to their ancestral house or their specific polo clubs and associations. So this aesthetic object was given a new lease in life and in fact became perhaps more popular than it has ever been after it made its return in the 60th anniversary in 1991, originally designed and patented in 1931. And of course, the modern examples actually use the two faces of the watch, not only for strictly aesthetic purposes, but also towards additional complications, towards with an eye to adding extra functionality to the watch. The chronograph and the tourbillon are especially popular, but of course, the dual-faced versions of the watch lend themselves really well for the dual time function as well, for a travel watch, thus. Number 8, I'm actually surprised that the Nautilus is not much higher. The Patek Philippe Nautilus, designed by Jaraganta in 1976. Of course, it comes after the original influential Jaraganta design in the form of an integrated bracelet luxury sports watch, the Royal Oak, which came out for the first time in 1972. The original Nautilus 3700 Line 1A in stainless steel came out 4 years after the Royal Oak in 1976 and was in many ways executing a similar trove of influences. It was very sporty and luxurious, to be sure, but also with its remarkably thin, slim case, about 7.6 millimeters in height. It was also quite dressy and elegant at the same time. It's quite interesting now, quite exciting, I should say, to see what Patek will come up with to celebrate the 50th anniversary of this watch. I know under the leadership of Thierry Stern, they have been, in a gingerly fashion, kind of trying to move away from the overarching influence and pull of this design, but I think it's inevitable. They have to do something very special. And in fact, maybe a whole refresh of the collection next year when we will remember, when we will commemorate the 50th anniversary of the first release. Number 7 is the Patek Philippe Calatrava, the classic dress watch by Patek Philippe. In many ways, the quintessential, the archetypal dress watch. The reference 96 is perhaps the most desirable, the most collectible among the lot. William Massena says the reference 96 is the mother of all wristwatches. It defines what a high quality watch should be, and its aesthetic, its influence after nearly a century is still far reaching, and it is still copied by all the watch brands. Lot 6, number 6, I should say. It's a Rolex Cosmograph Daytona 6263 Paul Newman. It is the Daytona, but in a very specific iteration with that version of the exotic dial that has been associated with the proper name of Paul Newman before his personal example was publicly discovered and sold for a record-breaking amount on public auction. Apparently, the Daytona itself received 21 votes from the people solicited for this list, with the Paul Newman being specifically mentioned 10 times in those nominations. So this piece, according to people who compiled the list, deserves its place, its discrete place and position within this list. Alex Lubin says, while my Paul Newman Daytona would probably be the last watch I would ever sell, it's fair to say the main sport pieces from Patek and classic references from F.P. Journe are a close second. Number 5 is the Rolex Cosmograph Daytona writ large. The Rolex chronograph in so many ways, to the extent that it reduced everything that came before it to the so-called pre-Daytona, which is kind of a shame because some of those iterations of the Rolex chronograph from the mid-century are quite handsome, very rare, and absolutely collectible in and of themselves. But there we are, in a hype that gradually took over the passions of perhaps the entirety of the horological world since 1988. The Daytona has become perhaps the most desirable watch on the planet. Number 4 is the Cartier Tank, again, pure and simple, rather than its variations. Its shape is actually inspired by Louis Cartier and how he visualized some of Renault-made French tanks during World War I. Apparently, Louis Cartier gifted the original prototype to General John J. Pershing. So whether that origin story is factual or fictional, it remains a watch that is associated with the history of the World War I. The Cartier tank at number 4, worn famously by Jackie Onassis, John F. Kennedy himself, Duke Ellington, and many others. Number 3, the Rolex Submariner. Well, my favorites are slowly but surely coming up. The original dive watch, released in 1953. I guess having skipped over 2023, Rolex has to do something very special about this in 2028. But again, in terms of its original iconic design, the Submariner has become, for so long, the incontestable icon of the brand. Of course, that position has perhaps been ceded in the current order of things to the Daytona. And in fact, the Submariner may have slipped to the 3rd position after the GMT Master in terms of perhaps being less desired, not necessarily produced in lesser numbers, sold in lesser numbers, but I think it's undeniable, and I say this as a Submariner man, that the GMT Master sort of took a primacy over it in current time. But of course, time is cyclical, and such trends may in fact die out sooner than later. Lot 2, another personal favorite in terms of design, the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak, originally launched in Basel in 1972 as the reference 5402 ST, ennobling the stainless steel material as something just as precious as gold, ostensibly inspired by the aesthetics of an antiquated diving helmet for its octagonal bezel, and quite literally inaugurating a new era in terms of how it conceived the luxury sports watch genre, how it redefined the game in that segment, in that category, and how influential the integrated bracelet design has become in our time, in the post-pandemic era as well. And number 1, I'm sure if my friend Oz is watching, and perhaps others as well will be incensed by this choice, but hey, I'm not really surprised. Let's read what Robb Report writes in full. It's about 2 paragraphs. This is the watch that received most votes, apparently, in the middle of the 20th century in 1957. An auspicious year for Omega began. In one fell swoop, the Biel Bien-based brand launched its famed Seamaster dive watch, the Railmaster field watch, and most famously, its Speedmaster chronograph. It was called the Speedmaster precisely because it was meant to time speed and distance at the track. It was born, like most chronographs, as an automotive timepiece, yet its design foreshadowed bigger things to come. It was the first wristwatch to feature a tachymeter scale on its bezel rather than on the dial, with the intention to make the chronograph more legible. And its case, though it featured straight lugs in 1957, fairly quickly sprouted the twisted lugs, the lyre lugs, famously made by Huguenin Frère, made its profile so recognizable over the decades. Its hand-wound movements, the original Lemania caliber, in Omega's iteration, the 321, was the powering, or did power, the original Moonwatch. The Speedy's legend was truly born when in the mid-1960s it beat chronographs from Rolex, Longines, Wittnauer in a series of punishing torture tests by NASA. Thus qualified for manned spaceflight, the Speedy accompanied astronauts Buzz Aldrin, Michael Collins, and Neil Armstrong on the Apollo 11 mission. And of course, that Moonwatch moniker made it an object of desire for watch collectors world over, while a constant stream of largely incremental changes and many, many limited editions have kept it top of mind in the horological sphere. Though automatic versions, complicated versions, and biosourced plastic versions exist, it's the hand-wound, black-dialed, Hesselite crystal professional model that most embodies the Speedy spirit. Without it, the watch world would be a very different place. And perhaps it's actually a nice coincidence that this live stream on the Speedy Tuesday ends on this note. The Robb Report's greatest watches of all time, number one, the Omega Speedmaster Professional. Please hit the like button. I really appreciate that. I will end this stream quite soon. Hopefully you have saved your show of support and your engagement for what is coming up in less than 20 minutes. My friend Dizurdis is going to join me to talk about the new Paul Thomas Anderson movie, One Battle After Another, featuring, of course, none other than the Rolex testimony, Academy Award-winning actor Leonardo DiCaprio. I'm very much looking forward to talk about it, to think about it, to think with it, with my friend Dizurdis. So I look forward to seeing you in about 20 minutes, and I will send you the link in the chat so you have it ready to go. I want to see all of you there, and hopefully, again, I will see more of your support then. I very much look forward to seeing you. It was great talking watches with you once again to complete the 50 greatest watches of all time by Robb Report. The second part, I'm signing off. Stay safe, stay healthy, and wear and enjoy your watches. I'll see you in about 15 minutes. Don't forget to hit the like. Bye.